Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be, of course, taking a look at the UN General Assembly session, the 77th session, in which, of course, important discussions are being held with regards to various issues that currently the world is facing, including issues such as climate change, which, of course, Pakistan is also currently dealing with in the light of the recent floods that have devastated more than 33 million people. That is 1 out of every 7 country in Pakistan. And of course, we know that this amounts to huge losses and damage at home, something which is, of course, part of an important discussion at the sidelines of the UN General Assembly session as well, in a high-level session organized by Pakistan, in which there were numerous measurements taken in terms of the kind of action that is needed and what all needs to be highlighted. This is something that the Foreign Minister, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, spoke about at this event, and he highlighted the fact that the discussion around loss and damage, especially loss and damage financing for developing countries most vulnerable to global climate change issues, needs to be something that has to be talked about in the upcoming COP27 summit as well, and other climate change platforms, and part of the entire discourse on climate change, including the financing window by the international financial institutions to include a separate loss and damage window, and also the development of a standing debt restructuring modality by the IMF and other such bodies as well. This is, of course, an important discussion that was attended by major blocs of climate change, including also the president-designate of COP27, the Foreign Minister of Egypt, who also echoed the same sentiments of the Foreign Minister, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, and said that this is something that is extremely important. Others who were part of this session included representatives of the Green Climate Fund, Dr. German, and of course the Minister for Climate Change, Michelle Rahman, and Minister of State, Hina Rahmani Kar, as well. This is, of course, an important discussion with regards to what is going on at home, but it remains to be seen how it's going to be brought into light at the next summit and how these issues are going to be taken up at the high-level debate of the UN General Assembly session, in which, of course, the Prime Minister is also expected to speak. That is going to be our focus in the first segment of the show today, and we're going to take a look at this current issue and then, of course, the way it's going to evolve after this session as well. Our next segment is going to focus on the way that we have seen global intolerance towards the Muslim community spread. We've talked about how this affects the Muslim population worldwide, in countries in the West as well. And now we have some statistical analysis of the kind of data that exists in various countries around the world, and how social media platforms are also failing to prevent or take action against any anti-Muslim or any such comments that spew hatred against the Muslim population. This is something that has been brought out by TRT World, and they have spoken about the kind of issues that exist with regards to various social media platforms, talking about how 15% only of anti-Muslim posts have been removed in the time span from 2017 to 2021, with 85% remaining. And it also says that out of those that have been removed, this has been done because it has been hidden through a change of privacy settings, or taken down by the users themselves, or deleted by the moderators, which is, of course, important in terms of highlighting the role of the social media platform in itself. The TRT World also talks about how 85% of all anti-Muslim posts have been originated in 3 countries, mainly India, US, and UK, with 55% of them coming in from India under the BJP government. We also know that 89% overall failure exists on various social media platforms, with the way that these posts have gone down, with the most of the posts coming down on platforms such as Instagram, then Facebook, and much down on the line is Twitter, even though we have the same company taking note of various of these platforms such as Instagram and Facebook. So we're going to be talking about in general what this means, what these numbers state in terms of the kind of sentiment that exists around the world, particularly in these 3 countries that have been highlighted, and then of course the role that social media platforms have in terms of anti-Muslim comments, or in fact any sort of comment that targets a particular community or religion, and what needs to be done about that. That's going to be our second segment of the show today. For this and more, let me welcome in the studios, of course, as always with me in the debate, senior analyst Farooq Badafi, and for our first segment with regards to the UN General Assembly session and what is going on in terms of issues very current and relevant to Pakistan, we have been joined online by Dr. Awais Salim, Assistant Professor at Lamar University, Texas, and also Ahmed Jawad, Prime Minister's focal person on digital media and technology. Thank you very very much, Mr. Ahmed, for joining us, and Dr. Awais for being a part of the debate. Let me start with you, Dr. Awais. When we take a look at the current visit in terms of what has so far happened on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly session, of course, a lot of the bilateral meetings that have happened between the Prime Minister and his counterparts are very important. But currently, what is affecting Pakistan, and 1 out of 7 of the people in our country, is of course the devastating floods, and in the aftermath of which we're dealing with a health crisis, food security issues, the economics instability at home, and of course the kind of loss and damage that has existed in the aftermath of these floods is huge and will take us years to recover from, and we need sustained support for that, which has been echoed by the UN Secretary General on his visit also, and on various other platforms. This is an urgent and a global need, and so we need to be able to form part of the narrative of the conversation and include issues of loss and damage. How do you think this is going to work out in terms of the way that this in fact has been an aspect that has not been part of the climate change discourse and discussions earlier? And when we talk about issues such as donor fatigue, or the fact that of course Pakistan itself is going through its own economic instability, do you think that there will be an opportunity for international financing institutions to really look at this issue and open up these windows? Dr. Awais, can you hear me? Please, can you please unmute yourself, because we can't hear you. Yes, go ahead.
Could you unmute yourself and talk as well? Right.
Dr. Awais, we're unfortunately unable to hear you. Right, I think we've got some sound. Dr. Awais, can you hear me? Can you please say something? All right, so we'll go back to Dr. Awais and talk about this important issue, of course. But Farooq, with regards to, of course, the issue of floods in our country and the devastating impact of climate change, this is, of course, an important debate for us. And there are platforms such as the COP27, which, of course, take a look at this in more depth. But when we take a look at the current platform, the UN General Assembly session, and the way that Pakistan is highlighting this issue, do you think that this will be able to pave the way for this discussion to form part of the COP27, especially when the President-designate, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, was also part of this discussion and reiterated the same sentiment?
Absolutely. Sana, first of all, let me actually go for a shout out to all those world leaders who in their speeches, right from Secretary General of the UN to President Biden, everybody who took note of Pakistan's suffering at this moment. Thank you very much. We need every bit of help that can come our way, right? Secondly, let me also point out that our young foreign minister, while he was talking, it was his birthday. Today is his birthday.
Oh,
right?
really?
Yeah, and yet he is working there. But
I never work on my birthday.
Yeah, but let me actually talk about this idea of credit swaps or restructuring credit, right? Especially given the circumstances that Pakistan finds itself in, and the rich countries actually don't take that much notice of. It is very important to remember that most of these countries that have been affected by climate change are not the big polluters, right? Pakistan being one of them. You keep on reminding us that Pakistan contributes only 1% or less than 1% to international carbon emissions, and yet Pakistan is 1/3 of Pakistan is underwater. So at this moment, you have to look at the state of affairs regarding state of Pakistan's economy and how can you actually right the wrongs done to the country. The best thing is to actually find a way that your credit, instead of being credit, becomes some kind of fund regarding capacity building of the economy and capacity building regarding climate change. So I think Bilawal Saab was absolutely on money when he actually talked about it, and somewhere I feel that there has been a change as well. It seems that many leaders internationally, especially from affluent countries, actually recognize that if you are moving forward, you'll have to actually do something about climate change, and most of these countries who are affected don't have the kind of monies to fix this problem. So there will be need to help them out as well. We have already seen that ADB has announced that it is going to step up. There are other financial bodies that might come in handy at this moment. So it is important right now. And secondly, remember that because of COVID situation, when the entire world was going through COVID, a lot of currency was generated in the US and also through the IMF system, right, the SDRs. So that might also be contributing to their recession, that is actually inflation that is growing. So why not actually put it to good use to exercise this system? Why not actually focus on Pakistan and help Pakistan build its capacity by taking some burden off of its loans?
Absolutely, and we really hope that there is some work done on that level as well. Mr. Ahmed Jawad, considering, of course, Pakistan's current need at the moment and the way that we need to move forward, it is, of course, important for the world to be able to understand that and take that into account. There is, of course, an entire exhibition that is going on the entire week, which is talking about this entire issue and calling it a climate carnage. That is, of course, something that the UN Secretary General also talked about. But unfortunately, we don't have Ahmed Jawad Saab with us. So, Farooq, when we take a look at the current situation, this is also important in terms of how we are able to sustain support in terms of highlighting the issue as well. And it's important because in terms of any issue or conflict, perhaps it's unfortunate that over time it does not have the same kind of limelight that it initially enjoyed. So this is, of course, an issue that is going to take many years for us to recover from. It's very, very current. People right now are suffering, but it seems that the attention has shifted a little. Isn't that so?
Right, Sana. And look, let me tell you, when about 20 years ago I started my media, particularly television journey, right? At that time, the first thing that we were told was show, don't tell, right? It is very important to illustrate what exactly is happening. This age is actually made for pictures or visuals which can highlight the state of affairs. How do you do that? Because at this moment everyone has a camera, everyone has a mobile phone, they can take pictures, those pictures then can go viral and it has impact. Remember when the flood started, the first visuals every channel played were made from these mobile phones,
right,
and they were actually taken from social media. So at this moment, I think it is very important. Perhaps the world understands that there has been a catastrophe, but they don't know the magnitude. So it is very important to actually go for exhibitions, use all sights and sounds and the feelings as well to share with the world so that they wake up and do something about it.
Absolutely, and it's important for us to realize the importance of social media, as you highlighted as well. And this is perhaps something that hasn't really been made use of in terms of how we take a look at the kind of massive appeal that exists. It took a while for the world to even grasp what 33 million actually meant. That was, of course, entire populations of various countries as well. So currently, it seems that this is important in terms of the UN General Assembly session. Is also important in terms of making people aware of the issue and realize the scale of the damage. But when we talk about understanding what is going on, it's of course a lot of difference in terms of actually coming in and witnessing the issue over here. In our future, the way that our future is going to move about, the way that loss and damage is going to be more clear, and the kind of sustained help we need, especially in terms of infrastructure development, do you think that we have a strategy or plan in terms of inculcating international partners on every step and making sure that they're aware and part of what is going on?
Right. The biggest problem, Sana, why we are where we are at this moment is because Pakistan perhaps did not know how to handle all these disasters, right? Usually when you talk about big dams, you used to have to consult with ADB, other internet or World Bank for that matter, for construction and for technical support as well. Even right now, because the challenges are so big, they are bigger than the country itself, because it is a global problem. Pakistan will be needing not only help in terms of money, it will be needing help in terms of skill as well. So at this moment, the great thing about UNGA, because it is a democratic body, although it might not have that kind of power, but it is very important. The entirety of UN system hinges on its General Assembly, because it is the only democratic assembly they have. So at this moment, because all countries are participating, everyone has skin in the game. So it is a great opportunity to educate people, to actually share your anxiety and your suffering with other people and seek help. At this moment, unfortunately, India's Prime Minister, I am told, is not taking part in the UNGA conference or the session. Had he been there, India and Pakistan have a common interest in fighting climate change, because if you look at the future maps of the world, temperature maps, the hottest places will be in India and Pakistan.
Absolutely.
And these are countries, A, they are going to be most affected by global warming, and they will also be most affected by the uncertainty of waters, the way we are seen in Pakistan. So at this moment, I think there has to be a regional cooperation as well. China is a country that have actually bested all of these changes, and they keep on actually working on and fighting nature. The US is once again investing in its infrastructure. It understands how to actually curtail or control and climate. So if they can actually work together, and there is a regional focus as well, we can really go places, because in the end, whether it is Indians who die or Pakistanis who die or Bangladeshis or Afghanis, I think in the end it is a loss of humanity.
It is, absolutely. And this is, of course, something that was talked about by the UN Secretary General as well, where he talks about collective action and the world needing to realize the fact that the kind of issues that we face right now are something that are shared by everyone and require that sort of collective action. But it seems that, considering, of course, the political and economic issues, such as Pakistan and India's or others in the world, that is currently something that is given more importance and attention to, and not the kind of urgent stakes that we all have in climate change issues. If that is so, then when we take a look at what is going to happen moving forward in terms of global action prior to any such catastrophe, can we be able to direct resources towards that, such as what the UN Secretary General mentioned in terms of early warning systems, for example, for any catastrophe? Will we be able to cooperate even on such levels and forget about the political issues?
Right, and that actually reminds me of two things, very important things. One, regarding what happened in Pakistan recently, these floods, there were early warnings, right? But then there is the question of capacity to fight back as well. And we haven't seen that kind of capacity existing either in Pakistan or, for that matter, even in India, because these countries are post-colonial states, and they don't have the kind of wherewithal to actually fight the future, right, or fight for the future. So that is one kind of caveat or concern that I have. But having said that, it also reminded me of President Obama's book, The Promised Land, in which he actually mentions that when Paris Accord or Paris Agreement was going on, or there was talks about that, at that time India and China were not to be found. And then he had to actually raid a hotel room to find the Indian Prime Minister, who did not want to actually work with him. So they had to actually strong arm him, and then he actually signed on the dotted line. At this moment, the problem with South Asia, and I've been saying this for 25 years or 30, we tend to make everything about politics. Not everything is. Cricket is not politics, economy is not politics, religion is not politics, and climate change is not politics. It is about existential issues, it is about human survival, and it is very important that we all actually work together. So in the end, you'll have to, some leaders will have to go out and convince others. I'm glad that when it comes to domestic policy making, President Biden is already taking a lead. Right. And then President Macron actually also has a voice in international matters. They both either met or are going to meet our Prime Minister.
Right.
So let us hope in coming days we see some kind of structural change in approach to these problems.
Right, and I understand what you mean when you say climate change is not political, but I'd like to talk more about how, in fact, the political aspects do actually make way in terms of the way that it's going to impact different countries around the world and different communities within a country as well. But let's talk more about that later. Let me also once again try and get connected with Dr. Avais Salim, Assistant Professor, Lamar University, Texas, join us now on telephone line. Mr. Avais, can you hear me? Professor Avais Salim, are you with us? Unfortunately, I don't think I can hear Mr. Avais Salim again. But Farooq, I want to talk a little bit more about what you just said. When we talk about the kind of impact that climate change has on more vulnerable communities and developing countries, it does sort of take into account the social, political, and economic factors, does it not?
Yeah, it does. And mind you that I'm from a generation which grew up talking or hearing that even AIDS is a political crisis, right? But let us be frank. Not everything can be politics. Politics an inadequate, field of operations. Yeah, it depends a lot on gut feelings and how actually each leader goes ahead and actually addresses certain policy issues. At this moment, it is important to recognize that all these, serious policy challenges have stepped out of political realm, and they are a reality on their own, and they are actually, posing a threat to the humanity at large. So when you realize this, and mind you, I earlier talked about India and Pakistan as post-colonial states, but they are also highly stratified societies. In India, the bulk of population is the lowest caste, right? And they suffer the most because there are cultural issues, there are political issues, there are others caste-related issues. But in the end, they all are related to how poor you are or how depressed your class is. So in that context, perhaps we can actually go to Marx and borrow his understanding of politics. Otherwise, I think climate change, these issues of privilege and lack of it, these all matters in their own right, and I think it is about time we start addressing them.
All right, let me once again try and get connected with Dr. Avais Salim, who I hope can hear me this time around. Professor Avais, are you with us? I'm unfortunately still unable to hear you. Professor Avais Salim, you've joined us on Skype, I believe. Are you with us? No, unfortunately, I can't hear him. Farooq, when we take a look at the way that the global action and call for climate change exists, of course, there are a lot of countries, a lot of leaders who are talking about it, who are raising their voice with regards to climate change issues around the world and the kind of responsibility that exists to major contributors of global carbon emissions. But in terms of the way that this entire issue is understood by the world in general, there are, of course, people which don't recognize this as a real issue. There was, of course, a lot of followers of Donald Trump as well who believe that this is all fake news. But in terms of the way that we stand regarding climate change issues at the moment, do you think that the larger portion of the world is aware, understands, and is ready for change?
Yeah, if you remember last time we also mentioned or discussed Donald Trump. At that time also we kept on talking about climate denials, right? That day I actually brought up the issue of Louisiana, which is an important state in America, one of the poorest, and how their political elite and then religious elite and media pundits actually worked together to convince people that it is in their interest, best interest, to let the rich people pollute the environment, right? And the next day it was actually escalated in the US Congress as well, and then we have heard other statements coming from the US. But the problem, see, this nexus will always exist. But what do you do when there are people who are actually making a lot of money out of climate concerns as well? For example, who is the richest guy in the world? Elon Musk, right? What he is doing is actually shifting cars or vehicles from what do you call fossil fuels to cleaner energy. But do you think that in this age, on one side, he is actually also, lending support to the idea of Bitcoin, which is an immense, not only Bitcoin but cryptocurrencies, they also are immense polluters. And then he is also, his own plants are not always according to the climate, requirements. That's why he changed his base of operations from California
Right.
to Texas. Is there a guest with us?
No, carry on.
Yeah, he shifted from California to Texas, right? Because Texas doesn't tax you a lot and it doesn't have climate regulations. With all that kind of a situation, there will be people who want to profit off it as well, but they are also abusers. We'll have to confront them. But if the political leaders like President Biden and there are umpteen other leaders who are great, let me once again mention President Macron, because he has been very clear on this matter. And then we have seen Japan's government as well. Japan has, in Fukushima days, it has suffered a climate disaster, right? With that kind of leadership, there can be advocacy and very strong advocacy in support of climate change policies, policies which combat climate change.
Absolutely.
And they can take a responsibility and bring about a change in the mindset of these people as well.
Right, and those are some interesting things that you have raised, and I'd like to talk more about that. But we'll take a short break and be right back. Welcome back to the debate. We were talking about the climate change issues with regards to this issue being highlighted at the UN General Assembly session and what that would mean for Pakistan and how to take that forward. Farooq, before the break, you were talking about the kind of issues that exist in terms of the regulations at home and in terms of the responsibilities of different companies and CSRs. And that's an interesting take on the way that perhaps the private and corporate sector needs to also act more responsibly. So we'll talk more about that as well. But let me try and connect with Dr. Awais Salim, who's joined us on Skype. Dr. Awais, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Absolutely.
finally, I can hear you. Very nice to hear your voice, and thank you very much for joining the debate. Dr. Awais, we've talked at length with regards to the climate change issues. Of course, there are the devastating floods at home, which are really important to all of us, affects 1 in 7 of the people in Pakistan. This is an important discussion that's happening at the UN General Assembly session as well, and on the sidelines of which the foreign minister has also spoken about the way that loss and damage financing needs to be included. What do you expect in terms of the way that this issue is going to be taken up next at the COP27, and in ways in which we can actually look for the financial institutions and bodies such as the IMF taking a look at supporting developing nations such as Pakistan in terms of windows of financing regarding loss and damage, and also in terms of debt restructuring that has been proposed by Pakistan.
And Dr. Saab, if you remember, when Paris Accord was actually signed, at that time there was a clause regarding creating a fund to take care of climate change. We haven't heard about that. Do you think that this is about time that that also happens?
Yeah, that's a good question and something to think about. And thank you for having me. I don't know what you have spoken about earlier because I heard your intro and then somehow I couldn't hear anything. But the thing here is that in this country, we have in the last few years seen coverage with regards to Pakistan and with regards to these issues, particularly climate change, ebb and flow. It is cyclic. It is based on events. Whenever there is something like that that comes to the forefront, it catches attention somehow. Then there is focus on it for some time, and then it goes away to some other event. And now, because Pakistan was largely in the background in the US media, but I heard Farooq talk about the politics back home. So that politics brought Pakistan back into the US media during the last few months. But this flooding has really been the story of the last few weeks. Then how the USAID chief went to Pakistan. Angelina Jolie is currently there. Houston, where I live, Sheila Jackson Lee is the congresswoman here, and she is the president of Pakistan Caucus at the Capitol Hill. So she took a delegation to Pakistan. So there really has been an effort to galvanize support on the Hill and maybe use that to gain some leverage from these financial institutions. I don't know how much of that will actually transpire because focus right now is on UNGA. And we have seen, I myself have covered UNGA, and we have seen that it runs two parallel tracks every year. And this year, it is important because after a gap of 3 years, it is happening in person. But most of the global leaders who take center stage, they talk about their own issues. Like President Biden's focus today was entirely on the Ukraine-Russia war. But the real action with regards to country-specific issues and how those can be solved are in the sideline meetings, and those optics have been really good so far. So my hope is that something will emerge from there, because although Prime Minister will leave on the evening of 23rd, Foreign Minister Bilawal and Ms. Kerr will leave for Washington, and they have another 3-4 days of meetings there. So there is something that is cooking. Like, for instance, you saw PM's meeting with John Kerry today, and he reiterated ongoing support for the disaster. The UN chief is repeatedly talking about the climate change and its disaster and how the world needs to gather at this stage. So my hope is that it will lead to something concrete, but it will be premature to say something at this stage.
Right. Dr. Saab, a great thing about having you as a guest is that you have actually worked not only as a professor, but also as a journalist. So you understand all the bodies where they are buried. Let me ask you about a very serious aspect regarding, climate politics. Yesterday or day before yesterday, a Western friend asked me, how do you feel to be, exhibit A of climate change, right? These leaders, international or world leaders, have been talking about climate change for quite some time, and now you have a big, humongous example. It doesn't matter who comes first or who is displaced or affected first. Eventually, because of climate change, every country will be affected. Is it not important to put a lot of pressure because of these circumstances? Is it not going to put a lot of pressure on these leaders of the world to actually make amends and make policies that bring about real change, particularly regarding credit swaps, economic burden, and all this anxiety that is generated by all these pressures on such countries like Pakistan?
And Dr. West, how exactly will this pressure be increased in terms of the way that we look at from countries such as Pakistan that are being affected, and the fact that bodies such as the UN General Assembly are non-binding in nature?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. You see, we need to realize that we need to speak to the world in one voice. We can't send mixed signals to the world and then hope that they will keep coming back to us and they keep helping us out whenever there is a tragedy like that. You earlier mentioned donor fatigue, and that is very real, but the magnitude of the disaster is such that they just can't look away at this time. But the point is that are we making a plan? Are we sharing those plans with the world, how we are going to mitigate this disaster at our end? What are we going to do with the aid that we are getting? What is our long-term vision with that? If you recall, there were a lot of promises and pledges after the 2005 earthquake. How many of them actually materialized, I'm not sure. We promised the world a lot at that time, but many of those things have not been done yet. Same was the case after the 2010 floods in Pakistan. Now, like I said, the magnitude of disaster is such that the world has to pay attention. But like I was going through some rough estimates, they are of to the tune of 10 to 15 billion dollars at this stage, while being conservative. So I don't know whether we'll get all that money to begin with. And if we can't, how are we going to negotiate that with the financial institutions like Farooq said? So yes, Pakistan is at the center of attention at present, but also we have seen that global conscience can be subjective. It is not all. It doesn't always work the way we want or it should. So world has its own priorities, whether we like it or not. So there will be some help, but if we are hoping that it will become a watershed moment for Pakistan and particularly climate change efforts globally, I've worked in the environmental communication area, and I have seen how as soon as the some time passes after the disaster, how the focus shifts to other things. So we are
Right.
basically talking about attention from one disaster to the other. So I'm not really
Absolutely.
very hopeful on that count.
Right, Dr. Saab, you are in a red state, and I understand that there are going to be concerns regarding how politics affects climate change policy. In Pakistan, also, you just mentioned, the meeting with John Kerry, and just noticed. Let me also point out that Pakistani opposition actually ended up making that meeting controversial as well. But regardless of what happened, is it at this moment, because there is so much skin in the game, because there is going to be such a horrendous effect on population around the world, not only in Pakistan, not only in India, is there not a possibility that the countries that are actually donors, that actually are lenders also, can come forward and do something about it? I understand that there might be donor fatigue, but we have seen that when it came to Ukraine, or when it comes to SDRs, when it came to COVID response, all countries actually opened up their kitty and spent as much money as was needed. So is there a possibility that finally Pakistan manages to draw attention to its problems by seeking help the way we are supposed to?
Well, I'll give you a local example here in the US, and then we can draw parallels with Pakistan. Climate change, as we know, is real. Here in Houston, in the last 5 years, I have seen snow that has not happened in 100 years. I have seen flooding
Yeah,
that the tune of which has not happened in 100 years. But like you said, we are in a red state, and our governor doesn't agree that climate change is real or we need to do something about it. Now, uh, the like I was mentioning earlier, what we promised the world that we will be doing with regards to structural reforms and other efforts that we need to do after all such disasters, have we done something like that? So the world will be looking at that. I'm not saying that we'll not get anything or we'll not get any leverage from these financial institutions. The only question I have is that whether whatever we get will be enough to kind of cover everything that we have gone through. I'm not sure that will be the case.
All right. Dr. Aves, our second segment is focusing on social media platforms and the way that they have failed to take into account anti-Muslim remarks. So I'd like to take your take on it as well. We're, of course, covering the story that has been put forward by TRT World in terms of how social media platforms have not been able to remove anti-Muslim posts from various platforms. And in fact, the way that these numbers are coming in, what it means and how exactly it needs to be dealt with. A lot of the content is being originated from India, US and UK, with more than 55% from India. And we can understand why that is so, considering what the BJP government has done so far. But when we talk about social media platforms and the responsibility that they have towards protecting communities from hatred, from anti-community remarks, anti-religion, this, of course, is something that needs to be taken into account, and for us to be able to call out such social media platforms as well. But this may not be as simple as that, and perhaps is very chaotic in terms of how it actually deals with in certain policies of different countries. How do we actually go about it in terms of protecting different communities and holding these social media platforms accountable?
and Dr. Saab, since we are talking about particularly Twitter and social media, what do you make of these reports from Twitter whistleblower who said that India actually exerted so much pressure on Twitter that it had to actually install an Indian agent in its policy making regarding these issues, censorship and all.
Well, you see, it is all about numbers. It is all about the size of the economy, whether we like it or not. I attended a meeting of the US Chamber almost a decade ago, and at that point, they were saying that each new product is designed thinking that if it works in two countries, China and India, that means that it is more than half the game. So you can easily understand the number of social media users and cell phone users in India and how we are minuscule in terms of that comparison even with India, let alone the rest of the world or Western countries. So
Hang on. Sorry to cut you, but I understand that India is a billion-plus country. But what about Muslims all over the world? They are over a billion as well, a billion and a half. And then other countries that have been subjected to a lot of hate on these platforms like China or Chinese population. You must have seen what was going on during Donald Trump's time. Don't you think that there has to be, apart from algorithms or these corporate interests, there has to be some kind of conscience that takes care of how hate is managed on these platforms?
Well, when you use has to be, that expression is based on morality, that is based on principles, and there I completely agree with you. The point I'm making is based on the ground realities and how the world reacts to these events. Yes, there are close to 1.5 billion Muslims all over the world, but the point is that are all of them as agitated about it as we are in Pakistan? Are all of them speaking to these social media platforms in one voice? Are all of them trying to react the same way as we are? Yes, we are one voice and we are trying to do as much as we can do as a country. But I don't think that homogeneity is there or that unity is there that is needed to raise that voice and get something done.
Right, that's a very interesting point to raise as well. Thank you very much, Dr. Aves, for joining us and being a part of the debate and for being so patient with us regarding today's show as well. Thank you, Farooq, for being with us and being a part of the debate. That's all that we have for now. We'll see you tomorrow.